Hey everyone, my name is Neil. I'm a practicing CPA. I have decided to start a podcast and I am going to name it Another Tax Podcast because it seems like there's a lot of them out there. I've been making some YouTube videos and content that way. And while I enjoy doing the editing and making sort of some very specific topic focused videos, I think like the podcast format, I can just talk and hopefully get a little more content out. And I think it'll be useful. I'll be looking for guests in the future. Willing to be a guest on your podcast if you see this and you like the content. So stay tuned for why I think taxes can be cool. So I've been thinking about this for to get some content down on this podcast. And I realize, taxes, we don't have the sportscasters that say the NFL or the NBA have, and even golf. I can't imagine watching Sunday golf on mute. I don't think it would feel quite the same way as when, you hear the podcasters just go berserk because somebody sinks a 30, 50 foot putt. We also don't have like our Iron Man. We don't have our superheroes. If you were put on the spot to come up with the Tony Stark of the CPA industry or the tax prep industry, I don't think I could do it. That being said, in recent years, I feel like we have gotten a few influencers and or folks that are kind of stepping up to the plate to represent the industry differently than when I first started back in 2013, 2014. Yeah, no, just think of like the announcer when Michael Jordan was like getting airborne from the free throw line to dunk on someone, or some of those early Tiger Woods Masters wins that were based on some insane chip in or whatever. We don't have that currently in the CPA industry. And or tax industry at all. The other thing is when you think about taxes for our customers or just as U.S. taxpayers, whether you deal with a professional or not, you probably, there's some personalities out there that love getting their taxes done. But I would say they're in the minority, and the majority are like going to spend some time putting off and procrastinating their taxes. And so I kind of looked up some stats on this that humans feel negative experiences twice as strongly as positive ones. And for a lot of folks, getting their taxes done, it's a negative feeling because they're going to owe money, right? And until they know they don't owe money, or if they're getting a refund, they're going to put it off. Avoiding bad news, 85% of people delay medical tests or financial checkups because they're afraid of the results. Okay. So this is the industry. The days of TiVo, I'm a huge University of Oregon Ducks fan, football fan. I go to games, on away games. Sometimes I will choose to record the game because when they're at home, the whole Saturday is dominated by that day. But when they're away, I sometimes have to be a dad or do something other than sit on the couch and watch that game. Plus, if I do really well and mute the phone and everything, I can watch the game without the commercials and all the timeout breaks, etc. I can get through it quicker. So I try to TiVo it. But then when we have real strong competitors, I often I have a hard time hitting play. And then, you get a bad score, and all of a sudden I find myself fast forwarding. I'm just like, oh man, this is going to be bad. This is going to be bad. And so taxes play in that field of bad for a lot of folks. And it's unfortunate because just like going to the dentist, if you put it off, your cavities get worse. Your plaque buildup's worse, which means the visit to the dentist is going to be worse. And most of us know this, but we can't get over the fact that our brain tells us it's negative and we need to put that off because we don't want to deal with that. So yeah. And why am I interested in this? Let's be cool or whatever. Um, I'm not your typical CPA background. I worked in two regional firms, so I worked with a lot of CPAs. I met a lot of CPAs at CPE, continuing education. I've met a lot of CPAs and tax preparers at networking events, etc. And I realized early on I wasn't a typical CPA, and I think most of that had to do with my background in that, you know, grew up lower middle class, started working in a restaurant when I was 14, and did that all through high school and learned so much about people. And, not that being a waiter is a hard job. It's not, doing calculus or designing rockets, but to do it well and get good tips, or at least back when I was doing this in the 90s, you had to pay attention to people. You had to learn a lot about people, and you had to do it very quickly. When you said hello, you needed to see what kind of mood they were in. When you came around for drinks, you needed to kind of get a feel of like what the what the overall direction of this meal. It's like, are we ordering a couple rounds of drinks before the meal even gets started, or are they in a rush, and they don't really have time for your small talk, even if you have a great joke. And so I got off to a good start learning about people. Then just out of high school, I sold cell phones back in like the Nokia day with the interchangeable faceplates, and you had to really push the add-ons. The plans were more or less, pretty straightforward back then. And sales just continued my education and learning about people. All the while, I think, I was trying to take a few college classes back then, but realized I needed to do something different, join the Coast Guard. Whoa. Okay. So I literally, found myself a few years in the Coast Guard where I had become qualified to work on the HH-65 rescue helicopter. And they put us up there and they tell us we're invincible. And I was a hoist operator, so we have to go out on these search and rescue missions. And I was stationed out here in the Oregon coast, where the ocean is scary. It's bad. We're talking sideways winds. We're talking seas that can change 40 feet in height between the peak of those waves and the trough of those waves. And so imagine you're in a helicopter and you're trying to maintain a 100-foot hover, and the 100-foot line is changing by 40 feet every 10, 15 seconds, and you're trying to drop a swimmer in there or get a pump down to a boat or whatnot. And unfortunately, there was sad times where, we were late to the party, or the party we showed up at was super dangerous and we weren't really authorized to do anything. And so, I found myself where I was literally in a helicopter hovering over dead bodies. And so that taught me a lot about, life and just what's important. And, and then I did about 5-6 years there. Then I went off to FedEx ground and got yelled at around Christmas time because we didn't have the loving term back then of Karens, but we would get Karens galore calling, and they wanted me to save the day, even though their package was like in Pennsylvania, thousands of miles away in a snowdrift. And there wasn't a lot I could do there. And I just had to get yelled at and kind of take it on the chin. And then we had the independent contractor driver model, and FedEx was going through crazy growth. And so, they were business owners, these small business owners, and I represented the company, and I had to listen to them and get yelled at by them. And sometimes I yelled back. All this to say, I did all this before going to school to become a CPA. So when I showed up as a junior, associate at my first firm, I had like just such a different lens to like where I was headed. I had kids already. I was married already. And it was wild, the difference, where a staff was afraid to go talk to a partner because they were a partner. Yet that was the person that held the information they needed to solve the problem they were working on. I didn't really understand that. I put my foot in my mouth a lot coming up because I didn't give, I think, the same, respect's the wrong word, but I wasn't as timid. And though I respected the people I was working with that had more years of service, and specifically in the CPA industry and preparing taxes and all that, there wasn't that built-in fear for me that I felt like the other CPAs were accustomed to. And then as I came up, I did everything I could to not instill that on the people that now relied on me for answers. And so, I tried to be the cool guy in taxes, so to speak. The tax industry has intrigued me. I love solving problems, and I've spent a lot of time coming up in client meetings trying to explain to clients like the why. First, I love when a client understands the why. It makes me feel better about when they sign the return that they know what's in it and why the results ended up how they are. But also because I kind of excited about what we accomplished. When we're doing some high level planning, we have the cost segregation study that just wiped out all kinds of current year tax, or we've worked 3 years to get this client to the real estate professional election, and finally we've pulled the trigger and look what happened, and this is why. That is some hard stuff to get a client on board with. And so when we set out to be cool or have taxes be cool, we have a lot of challenges in our way. So we've got this culture thing where it's like going to the dentist, visiting your tax guy, tax woman person, and then we have this old guard versus new guard. So we have the people that did the typical path and maybe had very little job experience, went to school, first job, or maybe they did some internships with a CPA firm or with a tax preparer, like an enrolled agent somewhere, and they are bred in this silo, and so they exude very similar traits to what the senior partners before them did, and they have similar prejudices or biases towards the industry and what we're capable of, how we should act, and what our clients want, right? I know with sort of with COVID, the advent of tech and everything, I feel like there's sort of this renaissance period happening with tax preparers and whatnot, in that what it used to take to go out on your own or even start a smaller thing, maybe a couple people from school or folks you've met, you decide you want to go in and start something. What that used to take was pretty surmountable. Brick and mortar building, receptionist, filing space, like you had to actually print returns and throw them into filing cabinets. Kind of getting your name out there was a lot of boots on the ground and trying to take meetings with clients or potential clients. There was a lot that had to happen, where today with the internet, some of the tech that came not only, it was already out, so Microsoft Teams, Zoom, these things already kind of existed, but post COVID, all of us were comfortable using them. Where prior to that, a lot of folks would die on the hill that for somebody to pay a CPA, a tax person, what they needed to make it make sense, they would also need to physically come to a fancy building with a fancy office and see you face to face. And that got dispelled with COVID's necessities of us needing to social distance and whatnot. And so I'm seeing this renaissance. And then I'm also thinking about this from this AI perspective. I've been using ChatGPT, AI. I now use Gemini and some others. And even like Loom, I have this video service that has built-in AI. So AI is kind of everywhere. But there are people in our industry that are poo-pooing AI, just like someone once poo-pooed going from a paper ledger to a Excel spreadsheet, or some of those early bookkeeping services programs that I never even got to see because I came in around 14. QuickBooks was pretty prevalent at that point. That was majority of what I saw, other than some of the bigger like AS400 big company systems. And there is no limit to the poo-pooing of the next thing. And I feel like the renaissance is because of the YouTube spaces, the Instagrams, the TikToks. The poo-poo is like, it's going to lose because these people are coming up and they have loud voices. They're not at risk of losing a position at a firm because they're on their own. And they're going to be fine on their own, and they're not thinking about going and working for a firm in the future. And the calculator. I mean, I was born 1980, 44 years old. And I remember sitting there with my calculator, and the person that was good at arithmetic in their head just couldn't not say, like, why are you using a calculator? Just do it in your head or just write it down. It's simple arithmetic. And it's like, why not use a calculator? Come on. And we just have so many iterations of that. But like, we're at a big turning point with AI and Zoom and Microsoft Teams and the internet, and even our all the tax preparing software that's out there, where I think there's a chance for taxes to be cool. It's going to get easier and easier to explain to people what's going on. ChatGPT is a great assistant in communication, and it's a great tool for the tax preparer, right? Or sorry, the tax payer. It's a great tool for them too. So if they are having, they go to a meeting and they struggle a little bit with what was said, they can now query GPT and say, hey, my CPA was saying this. Can you explain it to me like I'm 5? Guess what it'll do? It'll explain it to them like they're 5, and now they're better equipped for that next meeting to kind of like get onto that next threshold of planning, where, years ago, that was hard to get your client to the next threshold of planning to where they could get to the cool place of tax. I laugh at myself even saying the cool place of tax, but yeah, I think it's possible. We're headed there. We're going to do it. It's happening. I'm seeing it all over. A little bit of the theme of this podcast just on LinkedIn, somebody it was an endearing LinkedIn post that your CPA is not cool. I'm going to probably not quote it perfectly, but along the lines of your CPA is not cool, but consolation, and maybe the great thing about a CPA is that they're indispensable to your business. So they don't need to be cool. And I'll agree, we don't need to be cool. But yeah, like the old guard is fine with not being cool either. And I think we can be cooler than we are. I think we can do a lot to help people with their taxes and try to get away from the dentist sentiment that this is a visit to the dentist and you have cavities and you need a deep clean and all these things need to happen. I think we can do that. And if the analogy for being cool, it to me is that let's get people feeling better about talking to us, and let's get better about communicating the bad news. And so that's there. With that, maybe some new experiences need to be happen. The old guard needs to stop poo-pooing the Excel spreadsheet, what was it called? Like a telecast. They used to before tax software, CPAs had this moment where they would create these input faxes, like telefax maybe, and they would send numbers off into the sky that then would get inputted in like one of those big, IBM warehouse type computers, and then they would get a tax returns spat out. Like that was the first sort of tax software automation, where now we take for granted TurboTax, TaxSlayer, UltraTax, Walters Clowers, with Cert, ProBooks, or the Intuit one. It's wild where we've come, but there are still CPAs practicing that know of that tool. And if you sat them down and interviewed them, I bet the firm at the time of using it was divided. There were old guard that said, why would you do that when you can just do it by hand, right? But imagine manually calculating a return and getting it correct. It was a lot of work back then. I've never had to experience that. And for me to sit here today and think that a kid that's coming out of school or maybe didn't even go to school, wants to become an enrolled agent, can't find the tools to serve their clients well, if not great, that would be highly presumptuous and not rational in terms of what it's going to take for somebody to prepare taxes 10 years from now. So other kind of changes that are happening is that you can build trust through social media now. You can build trust through YouTube videos and blog posts, where that was hard to do with the boomer generation. I'm Gen X technically, but we were like a physical handshake type of person, and anybody over the phone, they had to be real slippery. They had to be real good for us to. Silver tongue is a tongue-in-cheek kind of expression, right? They had to be real good snake oil salesmen before we would say yes to something over the phone, and that's just not where we're headed. And so would love any feedback, comments on the kind of the inaugural podcast here. I hope to kind of go through some of those planning techniques, but then I also plan on just sharing my thoughts about things that come up. I think my next podcast, I'm going to go through the big, beautiful bill and how that affects us, both from the tax preparer side, but then also individuals, maybe touch on both. There's, it's been pretty quiet in the tax world. I started in 2014, and we had some changes every year through sort of finishing up, like Obama had the Affordable Care Act, and we had Trump come in, and we did the Tax and Job Cut Act. So I've had some big tax changes where my predecessors were talking like the 1986 alternative minimum tax changes that happened, and they had the golden years of just not having to worry about big changes in tax and a whole bunch of forms changing and everything, where I've been on the flip side of that, where the IRS has continually had to come out with some new approaches. And then we had the COVID years, we had the PPP loans, the employee retention credits. It's been a whirlwind. And so while there are some new things with that big, beautiful bill, I think I'll just kind of talk through it. And, there's a little more of the same, but there's some planning opportunities that got better. They weren't all the way gone for 2024, but 2025 is looking sweeter. So, another tax podcast, one behind me, and look forward to the next one.
Right.